Tonight, we are opening a set of encounters that almost never get discussed. Not because they're the loudest stories, not because they became famous, but because they stayed in smaller places, old notes, private interviews, local memory, quiet reports passed between researchers, police officers, family members, and witnesses who often wished the whole thing had never happened. These are not the familiar cases repeated in every timeline. Most of them never became part of the public UFO record in any lasting way. They did not build careers. They did not turn witnesses into public figures. They simply remained there, half buried, waiting in the dark. And yet, each one follows a strange pattern. Something unknown appears. A family wakes in the night. A car fails on an empty road. A trained observer sees a figure where no figure should be. A radar screen catches a track that will not answer. Someone speaks, and later, someone comes to make sure they stop. The first part of this video brings forward 5 rare close encounters. After that, the story widens into radar files, military sites, public waves, and the stranger fear that sometimes comes after a witness has already seen too much. So, settle in. Listen closely if you want to, or let the stories move slowly in the background. The Goulburn case begins several kilometers outside the town itself, on a rural property in New South Wales. In 1973, it was not a place built for mystery. It was a working farm, quiet at night, with a single-story timber house, and the kind of routine that belongs to families who live close to the land. There were chores, meals, school mornings, weather to watch, animals to mind, and the ordinary small sounds of an old farmhouse settling after dark. The family later asked not to be named when the account surfaced privately years afterward. The father was 39, the mother was 36. Their 2 children were 7 and 9. By all accounts, nothing unusual had ever marked the property before that night. No strange lights, no odd figures, no stories told around town. Then, around midnight, the father woke suddenly. At first, he thought one of the children had stepped into the hallway. Then he thought it might have been an animal on the tin roof. But the sound was not right. It was heavier than a child's footstep, yet softer than something falling. It seemed deliberate, as if weight had moved inside the house, and then stopped. He lay still for a moment, listening. That was when the hallway light flickered twice. The bedside lamp shut off at the same time, not slowly, not with the weak dimming of a failing bulb. It went out at once, and the house dropped into darkness. The father understood the difference between a blown lamp and a power failure. This was the whole house. He reached for the small torch he kept on the dresser. Behind him, his wife began to wake. He told her to stay with the children, though later he admitted he did not know why he said it. Something in the house felt wrong before he saw anything. The air had changed. As he stepped into the hallway, he felt a low vibration spread through his chest. Not a sound exactly, a pressure. He later compared it to standing close to a large industrial generator, except there was no engine noise, no hum from outside, and no source he could place. The vibration seemed to be inside him as much as around him. He moved down the hallway with the torch in his hand. The bedrooms were at one end of the farmhouse. The kitchen and living areas were at the other. Each step toward the kitchen made the pressure feel stronger. Then he saw it. A figure stood partly inside the kitchen doorway. One long hand curled around the timber frame. It was tall, well over 6 feet, and very thin. The skin, if it was skin, appeared gray-blue in the weak torchlight, smooth, reflective, hairless. Its neck was long, its head narrow, and its eyes were large, dark, and glossy, shaped almost like almonds. The fingers were stretched and strange, ending in rounded tips rather than normal human nails. For several seconds, neither moved. The father's torch shook in his hand. From behind him came the sound of one of the children crying. The figure tilted its head slowly, as if responding to that sound, or to the fear in the hallway. Then the father found he could not move properly. It was not full paralysis. He could breathe. He could think. But his arms grew heavy, his shoulders tightened, and his chest felt pressed down by an unseen weight. He tried to raise the torch higher and could barely lift it. His breathing became short and shallow. The figure watched him. Then it withdrew backward into the kitchen. The movement was smooth, too smooth, without the normal shift of weight that comes from stepping. As soon as it cleared the doorway, the vibration stopped. Air returned. The father later said that was the first moment he realized how tightly he had been holding his breath. The lights came back on moments later. The hallway lamp, the bedside lamp. The house seemed normal again. But when the family searched the rooms, nothing explained what had happened. No windows were open. No locks were broken. No door showed damage. There were no signs of forced entry. Then they saw the prints on the linoleum. They were three-toed with a triangular pad-like shape, spaced farther apart than any small animal tracks should have been. The father bent down and touched one. It was warm. Within an hour, a local police officer arrived. He photographed the marks and asked the usual questions, but the prints did not match what he expected. Not kangaroo, not livestock, not dog, not any native wildlife he could name with confidence. The official trail seems to have ended there, but the family said the visits did not. Sometime later, two unfamiliar men came to the property. They claimed to be from a government communications division. They asked detailed questions about the blackout, the timing, the hallway, the children, and the things seen in the doorway. Yet they showed little interest in the wiring, the fuses, or any ordinary cause for a power failure. Before leaving, they warned the family not to speak publicly. The effects lingered. The children complained of buzzing inside their heads for almost 2 days. The mother had nausea and a headache the next morning. The father developed a rash on his wrists that lasted nearly 2 weeks. A neighbor later reported radio interference on the same night. The family moved the following year. Skeptics could point to fear, an intruder, an animal, or a failure in the home's electrical system. But that leaves the secured house, the warm, three-toed prints, the police inspection, the full blackout, and the matching distress of 4 people inside the same home. In the end, the Goulburn farmhouse intrusion comes down to simple pieces. A dark hallway, a tall figure in a kitchen doorway, a father who could not lift his arms, warm prints on the floor, a police officer who saw them, and a family that did not become famous from the story, but left the house behind. The next case begins on a cold road near Domston, outside Helsingborg, in southern Sweden. It was the early hours of December 20th, 1958. Hans Gustafsson, 25 years old, was driving home from Höganäs with Stig Rudberg, who was slightly older. They had been visiting their girlfriends, and the drive should have been ordinary. A quiet road, a late hour, 2 young men heading home through winter darkness. But the fog was thick. Visibility dropped to only a few meters. The world beyond the headlights became soft and gray, with the road appearing and vanishing in small pieces ahead of them. At some point, The fog grew so heavy that they pulled off and stopped the car. They sat there for a moment, engine quiet, trying to decide whether to wait it out or keep moving slowly. Then they noticed the glow. It came from the woods to the right of the road, broad, steady, pale, and low. Not like flames and not like headlights. Through the fog, it lit the lower branches and gave the trees a flat, ghostly edge. Hans and Stig thought there might have been an accident. Someone could be hurt, so they left the car and walked toward it. At the edge of a clearing, they saw the object. It was disc-shaped, about 5 meters across and roughly 1 meter high. It rested on 3 protruding legs. Its light was pale and even, with no flashing, no visible windows, no engine sound, and no movement in the air around it. It did not look like a crashed vehicle. It looked placed there. Then they saw the beings. There were 3 or 4 of them, small and strange, perhaps 1.2 to 1.3 meters tall. They were bluish gray, smooth and soft-looking, rounded at the top and tapering toward the bottom. They had no clear eyes, no mouths, no hard outline like a normal body. Later, the men would struggle to describe them because the shape seemed less like people than moving sacks of thick material, and there was a smell, a sharp chemical odor mixed with something like burnt meat. It was strong enough to turn the stomach before either man fully understood what he was seeing. The beings moved toward them, not slowly, not with fear. They rushed forward and grabbed. One attached itself to Hans's leg with a suction-like grip. Another pressed against his torso. When Hans tried to push it away, his arm sank into the material, as if into thick jelly, yet the thing still held him with real force. Stig was pulled toward the disc. He fell to one knee as the beings adjusted around him. Their movements seemed coordinated, as if they were not acting alone, but following the same silent command. Hans realized then that they were not only surrounding them, they were trying to drag them closer. He broke free. Somehow, he stumbled back through the fog, ran to the car, and slammed his hand onto the horn. The sound burst across the road again and again, harsh and human in the white silence. The reaction was instant. The beings released Stig at once. They retreated toward the disc, and the object rose straight, upward into the fog. No roar, no spinning takeoff, no wash of air bending the grass. It simply lifted, disappeared into the gray, and was gone. When the men returned to the clearing, the smell was still faintly there. The ground showed tripod-like depressions, and vegetation had been flattened or disturbed. Later that morning, Swedish police inspected the area and noted possible landing marks. They also saw the condition of the witnesses. Both men were shaken. Both had scratches, bruises, muscle strain, nausea, and deep exhaustion. Skeptics can point to fog, fear, the late hour, and the stress of the moment. But the matched accounts, the injuries, the ground marks, and the police inspection make the case harder to set aside. What stayed with the Domston case was not only the disc in the clearing, it was the way the beings stopped when the horn sounded, as if they understood the signal, as if one sharp human noise had broken whatever control held the clearing for those few minutes. The Kamchatka case moves the story far from roads, farms, and witnesses who could turn to another person beside them. In 1983, on the Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia, a 32-year-old weather technician began what was supposed to be a normal 3-week shift at a remote outpost. He was not new to the work. He had completed 7 earlier rotations without complaint, and there was no known record of panic, illness, or trouble handling in isolation. The station was simple: a cabin, a cot, a stove, a radio desk, a main logging room, and a shed behind the building. His job was to record weather changes, support aviation reports, watch the pressure readings, and keep the station running through long, quiet hours. Nothing about the first evening stood out. Then, around 1 a.m., the radio changed. A strong static began pouring through the set under a clear sky. No storm was passing overhead. No heavy weather was moving in. The technician checked the equipment, tried the usual steps, and wrote a short line in the log. Interference. Sky clear. He shut the system down for a while and tried to rest. But just after 2 a.m., the fuel lantern dimmed. That mattered because the lantern was not electric. It should not have reacted to any failure in the radio system, generator, or wiring. Yet the light weakened in the room, as if something had drawn strength out of the air. When he looked outside, he saw 3 pale lights above the tree line. They were circular, evenly spaced, steady white, and silent. No blinking, no drift, no sound of aircraft moving over the forest. They held their places in a way that made them seem fixed, but not attached to anything he knew. Then came the sound near the shed. It was faint, a soft pressing noise in the snow. 1 step, perhaps, then another, then stillness. The technician stayed inside. He later said he did not feel brave or foolish enough to open the door. He remained in the room with the weak lantern and watched the front window. That was when the figure appeared. It stood beside the glass, close enough that its head filled much of the frame. The head was elongated, smooth, and pale. There were no clear eyes, no mouth, no nose. Nothing he could read as expression. It was not pressed against the window, but it was near enough that he understood it had crossed the snow and come right to the cabin. The head tilted once, slowly, then again, with the same measured motion. The witness later wrote that the movement did not seem like a person studying him. It seemed more precise than that, more like a test, as if the figure was checking how he would respond from the other side of the glass. He did not move. The figure shifted sideways out of the window frame, not by stepping back, not with the sway of a body turning away. It moved horizontally, smoothly, and left no visible shape behind it. Silence at the glass. Outside, the 3 lights changed formation. What had been a triangle became a horizontal line. The lights lowered slightly, drifted along the tree line, and then faded, still without sound. At daylight, the technician went outside. In the snow around the cabin, he found tracks. They were long and teardrop-shaped, about 30 centimeters from end to end. They circled the building, passed near the shed, and led back toward the forest. He drew them in his logbook, marking their spacing and the path they took around the outpost. The radio static continued for hours. It did not clear until late afternoon, after about 14 hours of interference. When contact returned, he first reported it only as a technical problem. Later, after being removed from the station 2 days afterward, under the explanation of staffing changes, he wrote a fuller private account at the urging of a colleague. Skeptics can point to isolation, stress, wildlife, aircraft, or equipment trouble, but the case does not rest on one moment of fear. It includes the long radio blackout, the tracks in the snow, the controlled lights, the lantern dimming, and a witness with a stable record, who had worked alone before. What stayed with him most was not the lights, it was the head at the window, the pale, blank face, the slow tilts, the feeling that he was not being attacked, not spoken to, not even frightened on purpose. He only observed The Grobnik Valley case begins on a road east of Rijeka, in what was then Yugoslavia. It was 1977, shortly after midnight. An unnamed man in his early 30s was driving with a woman in her mid-20s after a family visit. They knew the road well enough. The valley was dark, the sky was clear, the temperature was stable, and there was no fog to bend lights or hide shapes in the distance. At first, the trouble seemed mechanical. The headlights dim and then the engine sputtered. The driver pressed the pedal, tried to hold the car steadiness, and listened as the power faded out under him. Within seconds, the vehicle rolled to a stop at the side of the road. He tried the ignition again. Nothing. The woman watched the trees beyond the passenger window, still thinking it was only a breakdown. There was no reason yet to think otherwise. Cars fail. Batteries die. Roads at night make ordinary things feel larger than they are. Then movement appeared near the forest edge. 3 small figures came out from between the trees. They were about 1 meter tall and wore smooth, reflective metallic suits. Each had a rounded helmet dome with no visible face behind it. They did not run. They did not stumble. They approached in short, controlled steps, as if they already knew where each one was meant to stand. One stopped near the front bumper. One moved beside the passenger door. One took position near the rear of the car. The couple stayed inside. The figure at the front placed metallic hands on the hood and began tapping lightly. The sound was small, steady, and hard. The rear figure crouched near the undercarriage. The one by the passenger window leaned close enough that the woman could see the blank curve of its helmet, reflecting faint road light back at her. Then her body changed. She later described losing sensation in her arms and legs while remaining fully conscious. She could see, she could hear, she could understand what was happening, but when she tried to move, her limbs did not answer. The man felt pressure in his chest and weakness in his hands. He tried to reassure her. He tried again to start the car. He even attempted to reach the horn, but his arm felt too heavy to lift with normal strength. The figure at the passenger window tilted its helmet, not like a person curious about another person, more like something measuring a result. Then all 3 figures stopped at the same moment. Together, they turned away without speaking, without hand signals, without any clear sign passing between them. The front figure left the hood. The rear figure rose. The passenger side figure stepped back from the glass. In the same strange order in which they had arrived, they moved toward the trees. As they withdrew, feeling returned to the couple's bodies. Deeper in the forest, a cold white light pulsed once. It rose vertically behind the branches, climbed above the ridge, and disappeared. Only then did the night seem to open again. Afterward, they found 2 symmetrical, circular cold patches on the hood. The engine bay showed no clear damage, yet the battery was drained, and 1 week later, it failed completely. The woman had lingering numbness for about 36 hours, along with headaches. Police first treated the report as possible interference by strangers or vandals. Later, according to the account, a senior officer advised the couple not to speak publicly. The usual explanations are easy to name: a breakdown, vandals, stress, military activity, but the matched physical symptoms, the cold marks on the hood, the dead battery, the 3 coordinated figures, and the rising light behind the trees leave the case in a stranger place. For him, the clearest memory was the moment all 3 turned at once. For her, it was simpler. She remembered trying to move her arms and finding nothing there. The Banja forest case begins near the village of Banja in Elbasan County, Albania, in the late spring of 1990. The witness was a 41-year-old forestry inspector with nearly 20 years of field experience. He knew the land, the paths, the trees, and the sounds and burns of people trying to move quietly at night. His work often involved checking for illegal cutting near the Banja Reservoir, so being alone in the dark forest was not unusual to him. That night, he carried his normal equipment, a handheld lamp, a small logbook, a standard forestry-issued knife. He was not hunting for anything strange. He was following known paths, listening for axes, carts, voices, and the signs of people taking timber where they should not. Shortly before midnight, around 11:48 p.m., a sharp white flash lit the path ahead. It was quick, close to the forest floor, and silent. At first, the inspector thought someone might be using a flashlight. Maybe illegal logging equipment. Maybe a person hiding among the trees. He moved toward it, careful, but not afraid. Then he heard a brief breath-like sound off to his right. A second flash lit the lower trunk of a tree. Again, there was no sound, no lamp beam sweeping through branches, no person calling out. The light appeared and vanished too sharply, as if it came from one fixed point and then closed again. He kept going. About 40 meters ahead, between two trees, he saw the figure. It was extremely tall and narrow, with an elongated head and a pale, reflective surface. There was no visible hair, no ordinary clothing, no clear human outline. It stood so still that, for a moment, he tried to make it into a pale trunk, a sheet, a trick of the lamp. Then its face flashed. A short white burst came from the front of the head, powerful enough to light the trees, the ground, and the inspector himself. It hit him directly. He raised his arm, partly blinded, and felt the world turn white for a second. White light, still trees. When his vision came back, the figure seemed closer. He had not heard it move. His chest tightened. His limbs felt heavy. His breathing became shallow, and his grip weakened around the lamp. But he did not pass out. He did not lose time. He remained awake, frightened, and aware of the thing standing in front of him. Then the light flashed again, this time downward. For a brief moment, he saw the lower part of the body. The limbs were not shaped like normal legs. They looked like smooth, tapering pillars with no clear joints and no visible feet. After that, the figure retreated, not by walking as a person walks. It seemed to slide back between the trees, changing position without the rhythm of steps. Then it was gone, and the forest returned to its ordinary darkness. The inspector didn't file the event in his official forestry report. He knew how it would sound. Instead, he finished what he could, then later told a colleague in private. Over the next 2 days, he wrote a 14-page handwritten account, careful and detailed, as if the act of writing might hold the event still long enough to understand it. He also found marks. In the soil were oval depressions, about 20 centimeters long and 10 centimeters wide. On a tree trunk, at roughly eye level, were 2 faint circular warm discolorations. They were not dramatic. They were not enough to prove anything by themselves, but they matched the place where the light had seemed to fall. For several days afterward, he had headaches and minor vision disturbances. There was no missing time, no full paralysis, and no recurring symptoms. Skeptics could name illegal loggers, flashlight glare, wildlife, or night perception. But this was not a nervous boy in a strange place. This was a trained forestry inspector, nearly 20 years into the work. describing flashes from the front of a tall figure's head, followed by ground marks, warm tree marks, and physical effects that stayed with him after the night ended. His later account was plain. A flash, a figure, another flash, a silent retreat, warm marks on bark, and then nothing but the forest. We have now passed through the first 5 encounters: a farmhouse at midnight, a foggy road in Sweden, a remote cabin in Kamchatka, a stalled car in the Grobnik Valley, a forest path near Banja, where a trained observer saw light come from the face of something standing between the trees. If you are still listening, thank you for being here. And if these rare accounts are the kind of stories you want more of, you can quietly like the video, subscribe, or leave a comment with the case that felt hardest to explain. Dr. Herbert Hopkins was alone in his home in Maine on a September evening in 1976. He was a physician and also a part-time hypnotist. That second role had drawn him into the case of David Stevens, a young man who claimed he had been abducted. Hopkins was not a loud public figure in UFO circles. He was not chasing fame. He was helping with interviews, memory work, and the kind of careful notes that can build quietly around a case before anyone outside a small group knows much about it. That evening, the phone rang. The voice on the line was calm. The caller said he represented a UFO research group and wanted to speak with Hopkins about the Stevens case. Then he asked a simple question. Was Hopkins alone? Hopkins said that he was. The caller asked if he could come over. Hopkins agreed. The call ended. Almost at once, there was a knock at the door. That was the first wrong thing. There had been no time for the caller to travel, no car arriving, no delay. The man was already there. When Hopkins opened the door, he saw a visitor in a black suit, white shirt, and black tie. His head was bald. His skin looked unnaturally pale, almost waxy. He had no eyebrows, no eyelashes, and lips that looked crudely painted onto his face rather than naturally formed. The man stepped inside. His questions were slow and exact. He asked about the Stevens investigation, about the hypnosis sessions, and about details Hopkins had not shared publicly. As the meeting went on, the doctor's unease deepened. The visitor seemed to know too much, not in the way of a fellow researcher. In the way of someone who had already been inside the room before the conversation began. Then came the coin. The visitor asked Hopkins to take a coin from his pocket and hold it in his palm. Hopkins did. As he watched, the coin shimmered, blurred, and vanished. The visitor said, "Neither you nor anyone else on this plane will ever see that coin again." Ordinary explanation fell away. During the meeting, the man seemed to weaken. His speech slowed. His breathing became shallow. At one point, he used a small metallic tube, almost like a lipstick case, pressing it against his lips, as if it helped him speak or function. Then the warning came. Hopkins was told to destroy everything connected to the Stevens case. Notes, tapes, evidence, all of it. The message was not shouted. It was delivered with cold certainty, which may have made it worse. After the visitor left, moving awkwardly, almost robotically, Hopkins said he saw or sensed a bluish light in the distance. Whether that detail was literal or part of the fear that followed, the result was clear. He obeyed. He destroyed the hypnosis tapes. He burned the notes. He withdrew from the investigation. Skeptics have called the case a prank, an illusion, stage magic, or strange state of mind. But Hopkins risked his professional name by telling it. He also described knowledge of private case details, lasting fear, and a visitor whose manner matched a wider pattern in men in black accounts, Later, Hopkins gave the impression that stayed with him most clearly. "It was like talking to a machine," he said. "Not a man, but a machine disguised as a man. And in that sentence, the case finds its shape. Not a light in the sky, not a figure in a forest, but a visitor at the door, asking for evidence to disappear." The North Cascades Echo Trail was not a case built around a face, a doorway, or a frightened witness in a room. It began as a mark on a radar display. In April 1999, under unusually clean surveillance conditions, an unknown track appeared over the North Cascades in Washington state. The archival reference attached to the event was NORAD Western Air Defense Surveillance Record 9904 NC. The first detection came shortly after 2240 local time. The return entered the far northern portion of the radar display at an estimated altitude near 70,000 feet. That alone made it stand out. It appeared as a compact, coherent object, not scattered clutter or weather noise. Operators began the normal checks: range, bearing, altitude estimate, strength of return, stability from one sweep to the next. The track held together long enough to be treated as something more than a ghost in the system. Then came the transponder checks: no mode A, no mode C, no mode S, no encrypted military reply. In plain language, nothing in the sky answered back as a known aircraft should. The return moved southbound along the mountain range. Its motion was smooth and linear, without the wandering drift expected from many weather effects. It was too slow for a satellite, too high for known high-altitude aircraft under ordinary performance, and too steady to dismiss easily as random interference. Technicians checked the radar itself. No antenna fault, no power fluctuation, no pulse issue, no obvious system problem that could explain a false target. The weather did not help much either. There was no strong inversion, no storm scatter, no ducting pattern that matched the path. The air was quiet. No match. FAA radar later showed a faint, low-confidence return in roughly the same area. NAV Canada and American flight checks turned up no civil traffic at that altitude. No military flight plans matched it. No training missions. No emergency operations. No deviation reports. Satellite passes, re-entry paths, and predicted orbital debris were also checked and did not fit. Then 2 additional radars detected the same thing. One caught the return only part of the time because of terrain geometry. The other logged cleaner detections that matched the track's direction and altitude. That mattered. One radar can be wrong in many ways. Several radars, looking from different places, narrow the list. The object continued south. Near the Snake River Plateau, it vanished between sweeps, not gradually, not by fading into background clutter, not by stretching, breaking apart, or becoming weather noise. It was there, then it was not. The final classification was dry, almost empty. A high-altitude, uncorrelated track with multi-station verification. No aircraft, no satellite, no debris, no weather explanation, no transponder, no clear source. There was no person standing in a field looking up, no shocked family calling police, no strange visitor at a door. Only systems designed to watch the sky, finding something they could not name. The Hudson Valley wave was different from the quiet files that stay hidden in a single home, a single station, or a single radar log. This one moved across neighborhoods. On March 24th, 1983, calls began reaching police from Hopewell Junction, Route 9, Yorktown Heights, and other parts of New York's Hudson Valley. The reports were not all the same in wording, but they carried the same shape. Something huge was above the trees. At about 9 p.m., the Yorktown Heights Police Department began receiving many reports. By 9:30, people had stopped their cars. Some stood on lawns. Some watched from porches or rooftops. Across multiple counties, more than 300 residents reportedly saw a vast silent object moving through the night with white and multicolored lights. One caller from Hopewell Junction said, "There's something hovering over the trees behind our house. It's big, really big, and it's not making a sound." Another man, pulled over on Route 9, said, "It's above me right now. Triangular shape, huge lights all around it. I pulled over. I had to." The first widely publicized reports had come earlier, on December 31st, 1982, around Kent and Brewster. Witnesses described a huge boomerang-shaped craft above the treetops. Through 1983 and 1984, the pattern kept returning. A V-shape, a broad boomerang, white lights, colored lights, silence, hovering, and at times sudden acceleration. Public roads became quiet viewing places. The range of witnesses mattered. Local residents called it in. Police officers saw strange lights. Engineers and pilots added their accounts. An anonymous air traffic controller reportedly used binoculars to watch the object. A retired commercial airline pilot, interviewed when CBS News arrived in April 1983, said the silent hovering did not match aircraft he knew. Investigators from MUFON and QFOS began mapping the reports. They checked weather, interviewed witnesses, and looked for clusters. The Journal News later ran a week-long series in May 1984 that included more than 50 witness interviews, including police officers. The story was no longer just rumor. It had become a regional event, but there was also a strong skeptical explanation. Near Stormville, an ultralight aircraft group led by Howard Stein was said to have flown in formation with colored lights. Some sightings may well have been those aircraft. Formation flying can look strange at night, especially from a distance, and once a story spreads, people may connect ordinary lights to the larger wave. Still, that explanation did not cover everything witnesses described. Many reports involve silence at close range, a sense of huge scale, hovering, long duration, trained observers, and sightings at times or locations that did not easily match the ultralight flights. There were also questions about night safety, limited payload, and whether small ultralights could create the impression of one football field-sized craft moving as a single body. Researcher Philip Imbrogno interviewed witnesses with military flight experience. Air traffic logs from Stewart Air Force Base and Westchester County Airport showed no unusual activity during key times. J. Allen Hynek reviewed early reports before his death and regarded some as highly credible. The wave faded after 1986, though isolated reports continued into the 1990s. By then, the valley had returned to ordinary skies, ordinary roads, and ordinary nights. Years later, a retired engineer put the memory into a single line. People say, "Why didn't anyone get proof?" I say, "We did. We all saw it. We didn't need proof. We watched it with our own eyes." That is why the Hudson Valley wave still holds weight. It was not one witness in the dark. It was a whole region, looking up, seeing something and pass overhead, and then did living with the silence that followed. The Minot Air Force Base encounter took place before dawn on October 24th, 1968, over North Dakota. This was not an empty road or a private home. It was military airspace tied to one of the most sensitive systems in the United States, Minot Air Force Base, Minuteman, missile sites, security teams, radar operators, and a B-52 bomber crew all became part of the same strange event. The first reports came shortly after midnight. Missile security personnel near the Minuteman sites began seeing unusual, glowing lights. The lights moved and hovered near areas that were not supposed to have unknown traffic above them. In a place like that, strange lights were not treated as campfire stories. They were checked, logged, and passed upward. Then radar joined the case. Ground operators detected unidentified targets moving in ways that did not fit ordinary aircraft. The returns appeared solid. They accelerated, slowed, and hovered. They were not just weak smears on a screen. They behaved like objects with position, motion, and intent. A B-52 training flight was in the air that night. Controllers directed the crew toward one of the reported locations. Soon the crew saw a brilliant light pacing the aircraft. It was not a small twinkle in the distance. It held near them, shifted around them, and seemed far too present to be dismissed as a star or planet. Then came the detail that made the case harder to explain. The B-52's onboard radar tracked the object near the aircraft, while ground radar tracked a target in the same area. For several minutes, the visual sighting and the radar returns lined up, seen and tracked. At one point, radar indicated the unknown object was nearly overlapping the bomber's position inside a large military aircraft close to nuclear command structures and missile fields. That detail carried weight. Whatever the crew saw, it was not only a light, it had become a contact on instruments as well. Then the object shot away. It left at incredible speed and vanished from radar and sight. Meanwhile, security teams on the ground continued reporting glowing objects over missile areas. The event spread across the very systems, meant to watch, secure, and identify threats. Strategic Air Command gathered statements, radar information, and radio transcripts. The case was forwarded to Project Blue Book, where the official explanation leaned on familiar answers: stars, planets, aircraft lights, and atmospheric radar interference. Those explanations were simple, but to the people involved, they did not fit cleanly. Stars do not pace a B-52 at close range. Planets do not appear as matching radar targets near an aircraft. Ordinary aircraft identified themselves. Atmospheric interference does not explain missile security teams, airborne radar, ground radar, and visual reports all crossing the same night. That is why Minot remains one of the stronger military UFO cases, not because one person saw something strange and remembered it later, but because the incident passed through trained eyes, instruments, transcripts, radar logs, and official channels before being placed into an explanation many still find too small for what was reported. The case endures because it left more than memory. It left records. The Montana Midnight Cluster was quieter than Minot, but it carried the same unease. In 1978, over the plains of central Montana, radar operators watching the Malmstrom sector recorded something unusual above the missile field. The archival reference was NORAD Western Air Defense Surveillance Log 7809 MMT. The area was tied to the Minuteman silo network controlled by Malmstrom Air Force Base, a wide and guarded grid spread across open land. That night, 3 radar returns appeared over separate nodes of the missile field. They were not moving at first. Each return held at the same altitude within a narrow margin. They carried no transponder signals. They formed a rough triangle across the grid, as if 3 points had been placed with care over the landscape below. Operators began checks, gain levels, calibration, diagnostics, system, health. The steps were routine, but the result was not. The radar appeared to be working normally, and the 3 returns remained where they were. Then 2 neighboring long-range radar systems confirmed them. That changed the weight of the event. A single screen can produce error. Weather can bend a return. Clutter can fool an operator. But 3 separate systems seeing the same basic pattern is harder to explain away. On the ground, missile security personnel reported white-blue lights hovering in a triangular pattern above an isolated silo. The lights were steady, silent, and placed in the same strange geometry as the radar returns. 3 points in the sky, 3 marks on the screen. The radar reflectivity was later read cautiously as consistent with compact metallic bodies, perhaps roughly 10 to 20 meters across. That does not prove what they were. It only shows what the systems seem to be seeing. Not mist, not birds, not a loose scatter of noise, but distinct bodies holding position. Then the formation moved. The returns shifted laterally together while keeping their spacing. Ground observers reported the lights gliding in the same way, stopping above different parts of the missile grid, then holding again. No engine sound was reported. No aircraft answered. No flight plan matched them. Because the objects were near nuclear silos, surveillance continued. But according to the account, fighters were not launched, partly because the objects were mostly stationary and the situation remained unclear. The end came with a vertical rise. All 3 radar returns climbed rapidly in formation, still keeping separation. The white-blue lights faded upward until they were gone, and the radar contact vanished beyond useful coverage. Afterward came the familiar checks. No aircraft, no training operation, no weather balloons, no strong inversion, no plasma ducting, no geomagnetic disturbance, no radar malfunction that fit the pattern. The final archive notation was dry. No correlation achieved with known aircraft or atmospheric phenomena. That is the strange strength of the Montana case. No dramatic chase, no close approach, no witness staring into a face at the window. Only 3 steady objects above a nuclear field, moving together with clean geometry, then rising out of reach, formation, and then empty sky. The La Serena encounter begins along Route D41, near the El Romero sector of Chile's Coquimbo region. It was 1977, just after 10 p.m. 2 Carabineros officers were on routine patrol outside La Serena. The road was quiet. The air held the cool feel of the coast, with farmland on one side, low dark ridges beyond it, and very little traffic passing through. The lead officer was sub-official Ernesto Vidal. He was not looking for a mystery in the sky. He and the second officer were watching the road, checking the area, and moving through the kind of patrol where long stretches can pass without anything worth writing down. Then Vidal saw the light. It was a single, bright white object with a faint bluish hue hovering above the hillside ahead. At first, a helicopter seemed possible. That was the easiest shape to give it. But the details did not fit. There was no sound, no rotor wash, no secondary lights. The object appeared less than 200 meters ahead, and perhaps 50 meters above the hillside, close enough that silence became hard to explain. When the officers tried to call dispatch, the police radio filled with static. Their message would not go through. The light held for a moment. Then it shifted left in a smooth arc, stopped, descended slightly, and shot straight upward into the sky in less than 2 seconds. The hillside below it was empty again. Vidal logged the event in plain official language. Observed aerial object, no sound, interference on radio, movement inconsistent with aircraft. The next morning, a local farmhand named Claudio Reyoso reported seeing a glowing oval rise above fields near El Romero. He also noted animal restlessness afterward. A teacher commuting from Algarabito gave a similar account of a silent light around 9:45 p.m. with color and movement close to what the officers had described. The report passed quietly to a Chilean Air Force liaison. The officers were asked not to discuss it. In October 1977, a regional Air Force representative reportedly visited the station and took a photocopy of the logbook entry. Years later, researcher Hugo Kimu interviewed the retired Vidal. The former officer added one small detail that had stayed with him. Just before the light vanished, he felt pressure in his ears, like descending quickly from altitude. Skeptics could call it a helicopter, a military test, or a misidentified light. But that leaves the silent hover, the radio failure, the matching civilian reports, the Air Force follow-up, and the climb into the sky in under 2 seconds. Locally, some remembered it by a simpler name, the Light of Romero, or a bright shape above a dark hillside, seen for only minutes, then gone into the quiet Chilean night. Sheila Franklin first saw the light outside Indianapolis in July 1978. She was 29 years old, an office secretary living on the east side of the city. She was practical, private, and not connected to UFO groups. She had no public interest in the subject, no reason to bring strange attention into her life, and no plan to tell a story that would make people look at her differently. The sighting happened while she was driving home one evening. Outside town, above a field, she saw a brilliant disc-shaped light hovering in the air. It glowed from its edges, stayed silent, and held position for perhaps 1 or 2 minutes. Then it shot upward and vanished. The event frightened her, but not enough to silence her at first. The next day, she told a coworker. That coworker knew about MUFON and encouraged Sheila to write down what she had seen and contact an investigator. Sheila did what many witnesses do when they are trying to keep a memory from changing. She made notes: the road, the time, the shape, the silence, the way the object had risen. Weeks later, just after sunset, there was a knock at her front door. 2 men stood on the porch. They wore dark suits. Their faces were pale, their expressions flat. They showed no identification, but they knew her name. One of them said, "We need to speak with you about what you saw." Sheila let them in. That decision would become the part she regretted most. The men asked clipped, direct questions. How long had she stopped the car? Did she take photographs? Who had she spoken to? Had she written anything down? Did she still intend to continue with the UFO group? One man held a notepad, but never wrote in it. The other stared at her without blinking. Their speech, she later said, sounded mechanical, like listening to a recording. There was no warmth in it, no normal flow, no small, human mistakes. They spoke as if the questions had already been chosen somewhere else. What frightened Sheila most was what they knew. They knew the road. They knew the date. They knew details she had only shared privately with her coworker. They seemed less interested in learning what happened than in making sure she understood they already knew. Then came the warning. It would be better if you forgot what you saw. Not shouted, not threatened in the ordinary way, just stated, quietly, as if forgetting were a command she was expected to obey. After they left, the pressure did not end. A dark sedan began appearing near her home at different hours. Her phone line clicked and popped. Once, she said, she heard a faint echo of her own voice through the receiver. Neighbors and coworkers noticed the change in her. Curtains stayed closed. Answers grew shorter. Evening walks stopped. A knock at the door could make her freeze. Then her living room was disturbed. Nothing valuable had been taken. No money, no jewelry. But the notebook where she had written her sighting details was gone. She told a coworker, "They came back when I wasn't here. I don't know how, but they came back." Local police later denied sending anyone to her home. MUFON investigators found Sheila anxious, guarded, and reluctant to continue. She would confirm parts of the visit, then pull back. The light in the field had been strange, but it was not what had broken her sense of safety. She said it plainly. "It's not the light I'm afraid of. It's the men. That is where this final case settles. No photograph, no metal fragment, no bright craft returning over the field. Only a witness, a missing notebook, a visit no agency claimed, and a fear that outlasted the sighting itself." In the end, Sheila Franklin's case shows one of the darker patterns in these records. Sometimes the encounter is brief, and the silence afterward is what stays. Some encounters leave behind bright images, a shape over a field, a figure at a window, a mark in snow, a light above a hillside, a radar return moving where no known aircraft should be. But the cases we have followed tonight also leave behind something quieter. A family moving away from a farmhouse. Two men remembering a foggy clearing for the rest of their lives. A technician keeping a private account of tracks outside his cabin. A doctor burning his own notes. A woman growing afraid, not of the light she saw, but of the men who came after. These stories do not prove one simple answer. They do not give us a clean ending. They sit in the older, stranger part of the record, where testimony, fear, physical traces, official unease, and silence all meet. Maybe you are still listening closely. Maybe the words have started to fade into the dark around you. Either way, thank you for spending this time with these rare accounts. If you want more quiet stories from the unexplained edges of the archive, you are welcome to return. For now, let the room grow still, and let the unanswered things remain where they have always been, just beyond the light.